right now. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation of Mourning in the Morning. Today's topic is Holocaust survivors in Mount Hope Cemetery. In the spring of 2021, a committee of the Friends of Mount Hope began a project to recognize and remember the many Holocaust survivors buried in our cemetery. We have raised funds to erect a Holocaust monument, create a Holocaust archive on the Friends website, and develop educational programs. This morning, we will lead you on a virtual walk through some survivors' grave sites and tell the intertwining stories we have discovered while interviewing their families. Our two presenters today are Marcia Birken and Marjorie Searl. Marcia Birken is Professor Emerita from the School of Mathematical Sciences at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where she studied patterns, particularly those found in the natural world. She is co-author of the book, Discovering Patterns in Mathematics and Poetry. Her interests include art quilting, historical research, and photography. Marjorie Searl retired from Memorial Art Gallery in 2013 as Chief Curator. She has loved studying historic cemeteries from her youngest years. The Holocaust Memorial project combines her love of history with her love of her Jewish heritage. We're very proud to welcome Marcia and Marjorie today. I turn the screen over to them.
Thank you. This is Marcia speaking, and today Marjorie and I are going to tell you a story. Yes, we're going to tell you the story of Mount Hope Cemetery, but more importantly, this is a story about the importance of memory. And I'm going to let Marjorie take it from here.
Thanks, Marcia. And hi to so many of you who've joined us today. I see a number of names that gladden my heart, and thank you to all of you who are here. We want to say a few words about Mount Hope Cemetery for those of you from out of town. Dedicated in 1838, it was the first rural municipal Victorian cemetery in the United States. Now there are 350,000 graves, plus some, buried throughout 196 acres. Friends of Mount Hope was founded in 1980 to support the city's role in maintaining this beautiful treasure. We give tours, we sponsor programs, and we help with the restoration of graves. Of course, you can join us by going to our website. The URL will be at the end of this program. As Marcia said, today is a day about stories. Mount Hope Cemetery is a treasure trove of stories of historical and personal significance, no less so today than they were in their time, and perhaps even more so. Among the best known of our residents are Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. The Douglass plot, which you can see on the right, was just rededicated with the unveiling of stones for Douglass's first wife, Anna Murray Douglass, and his young daughter, Annie Douglass. To the stories of these individuals who fought so hard on behalf of civil rights and human rights, we now add a new chapter, the story of survivors of the Holocaust who are buried at Mount Hope. This new story crosses the boundaries of nationalities, of the city and the suburbs, the boundaries of religions and of gender. This is a story that is cautionary and that also lifts us up. Our survivor stories are more bitter than sweet. Some survivors had to walk away from jobs, lives, family, friends, homes to make new lives, but did not necessarily suffer the kinds of physical and mental abuse that we associate with Nazi Germany. Some endured the worst kind of hell and went to death camps and lost precious loved ones to the ovens. That they survived, we must understand as sweet, and it is our obligation to lift their stories up. For all, the bitter tinged their lives with sadness. Some were able to put the bitter aside. Some left us illuminating memoirs. Some preferred never to speak of their experiences, while others dedicated themselves to educating us about their lives so that people can be motivated to challenge threats to our freedoms. In the words of writer Chava Rosenfarb, who wrote a fabulous trilogy called Tree of Life, which I recommend to you, who was a survivor of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, a tragic truth has become clear. The world will never know what we are going through. Who will be able to tell it? Even those who survive will barely believe what happened to them was real. And in the words of Elie Wiesel, who survived the Auschwitz and Buchenwald camps, for the dead and the living, we must bear witness. Not only are we responsible for the memories of the dead, we are responsible for what we do with those memories. Burial is a sacred rite in Judaism. There have been continuous Jewish burials at Mount Hope from 1848 to the present day. As synagogues formed, they purchased sections in Mount Hope, including Temple Beth Kodesh, the Jewish Poor Lot, which was dedicated in 1885, Temple Bethel, Temple Sinai, Congregation Beth Israel, Temple Beth David, and other small synagogues that no longer exist. We know that there are Holocaust survivors buried at Mount Hope at the Jewish Britain Road Cemetery, which was acquired around 1881, at Whitehaven and at Pittsford. Our first focus is on Mount Hope and telling the stories of the survivors buried there. Here's the first TBK plot, burial plot in the city at Mount Hope Cemetery. Dedicated in 1848, it was restored and rededicated in 2021. It is not far from the Sylvan Waters, formerly known as the Lily Pond. It is easily accessible, and its stones are primarily inscribed in Hebrew. To the best of our knowledge, there are no survivors buried here. But when Friends of Mount Hope hosted its beautiful rededication ceremony of this site on a sunny day in 2021, a gentleman approached one of our trustees, Tony Filer, and asked to be directed to where the Holocaust burials were. This question found its way to our next board meeting of the Friends, and we realized that we had no ready answer to give, and that it was now our obligation to determine where survivors were buried and to honor them. Marcia?
Of course, as all good boards do, they formed a committee. And they asked Marjorie and myself to chair this committee. I was actually not on the board. I still am not on the board. I'm a volunteer. But we agreed that as two people who were Jewish, it was important that we chair this committee. We were given three charges. First, find out how many people are buried at Mount Hope who are Holocaust survivors. It was an unknown number. We didn't know how many survivors there were who had come to Rochester, let alone who had been buried where. Second charge was create a way to preserve the stories of the people who were buried there. And so we created a Holocaust archive on the Friends of Mount Hope website, and we will give you the URL to go there at the end of this presentation. Finally, the board decided through a unanimous vote that they wanted to erect a monument, a Holocaust monument at this secular, non-denominational cemetery. And so we were charged to raise the funds. In addition to myself and Marjorie, the rest of the committee consists of all board members. Pat Cochran, the president, is on the committee, and Christine Klein, who is an archivist and who keeps our website active. Nancy Uffendell, who was a genealogist and who is able to find almost any piece of information we ask her to. It is incredible what she is able to do. And Tony Filer, who in addition to being a board member and our link to the MCC project, which we'll talk about a little bit later, MCC has a Holocaust, genocide, and human rights project. And we thank Michael Biester for being here today. He is the endowed chair who runs that program. Tony was in that program when he was at MCC, so he serves as a link there. And in addition, he does most of the photography of the graves for us. Our first thing to do was try to figure out where it was likely that Holocaust survivors might be buried. As Marjorie said, the original TBK cemetery plot is over in this area, right near the Sylvan Waters. And since that is an old plot, and now there is a new TBK plot, we figured that we were most likely to come into these brown areas. Range number 10 down in here is made up of the Temple Beth El plot and the Temple Sinai plot. as well as some other graves besides those. Those are areas that these synagogues have purchased from the city. Range number 7 up in here is where the Temple Brit Kodesh new burial situation is. So we're talking up in here. And range number 9 is the Temple Bethel plot. And range 3, these two areas down in here, are more Temple Bethel areas, Temple Beth David, and Congregation Beth Israel. So we thought that most of our survivors would be buried in those areas. We did a lot of walking through the areas. Many of the Holocaust survivor monuments have Holocaust survivor written on them. And so initially, when we began in the fall of 2021, we figured that there were approximately 30 to 40 Holocaust survivors buried at Mount Hope. Thanks to the work of Nancy Uffendell, we have discovered that there are probably as many as 350, perhaps even a few more than that, Holocaust survivors who came to Rochester and settled here, Holocaust survivor families who came here and settled. Marjorie began the work for us by going to the Center for Holocaust Awareness and Information website. That is a website from the Jewish Community Federation that lists all of the Holocaust survivors that were known by them at that time and has linkages to either their written stories, their recorded oral stories, or their recorded videotaped stories on the website. About, I would guess, would you say 60%, Marjorie? 60% of the names on their lists have stories associated with them. Well, that leaves a lot of stories that haven't been told. As we continued our work, we compiled a database, and we now have a database where we have these 350 names and the locations of where they're buried, so that we have discovered there are about 115 survivors buried at the two Jewish cemeteries, Britain Road and Stone Road. Another 100 almost, I say 90 on the slide here, but almost every week we find 1 or 2 additional survivors. So there are at least 90, probably more than 100 survivors buried at Mount Hope. And the remaining 100 or so survivors are either buried in other cemeteries in Rochester, buried in Florida, buried in California, buried out of town somewhere, or thankfully, many of them are still alive. Here's the link that you would go to find the Holocaust Archive. We set this up thanks to the work of Christine Klein on our committee, and it is a separate page on the Friends of Mount Hope website. For each survivor that we can tell a story, we list a picture of their gravestone, the name, birth and death dates with the locale if we know them, images of the gravestone or cenotaph. That may be another new word for some people. A cenotaph is a memorial stone that is put up when there is no body that is buried there. We have the burial location in the cemetery listed as well, although I do have to say the locations are often not easy to find. And then we post their Holocaust story. So for the first 40 people we put up on the website, we linked to the CHI website, the Center for Holocaust Awareness and Information. So we are not reinventing the wheel, we're using all the resources that our community has to offer. Another 18 names have been researched by the Holocaust Committee, and we have now put their stories up on our website as well. And we have about 35 stories left to do the research on. Our third charge was to raise the money for and erect a Holocaust monument. This is going to be located in front of the new Temple Brit Kodesh plot. In fact, I'm going to just go back to here, to the map, so that I can show you exactly where it will be located. Where my cursor is lining here along Adlington, just before you make the corner turn, in front of the TBK plot, right at the roadside.
Between two beautiful trees.
Between two beautiful, and here are the two beautiful trees. So it will be sitting right in here. The foundation has been dug already. It needs a very deep foundation because it's a very heavy stone that's going in. It is designed by William Yeager, or Bill as we know him, with a lot of input from the members of the Holocaust Committee. It is going to be made of polished black granite with etched engraving. And I want to emphasize the polished black granite because that in itself has become something of a story. We have a story of the granite, which you'll hear. It will be 60 inches high on an 8-inch base. How did the fundraising go? Well, we have a remarkably generous community here in Rochester. We had donors across the spectrum from the Jewish community, ranging from absolutely secular to absolutely Orthodox, as well as many people who are outside of the Jewish community who contributed to this. We set a goal of raising $20,000 for the 3 parts of the monument that we will show you in just a minute. We began on mid-January of 2022. We closed the fundraising on April 30th, and in 3.5 months, we had raised $4,000 more than we had set our goal at. We raised $24,100. Well, here's our China story, the story of the granite. The particular black granite that Bill Yeager selected for the stone was very important to him in terms of first what it represented, the blackness, the depth of the blackness, the solidness of the stone, the ability of the stone to withstand wear, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that particular black granite is only mined in 3 places in the world: India, China, and Zimbabwe. And the particular quarry in Michigan that Bill deals with receives their stone from China. So the stone had to be shipped from China. It wasn't a problem getting the stone, but it was a problem shipping the stone because this was the period where China closed down for the pandemic. All the ports were closed. We couldn't get the stone out. Eventually, we did get the stone out, but we had a $4,000 surcharge. So it was a good thing that we raised $4,000 more than what we had set our sights on. Additionally, we received a $10,000 educational grant from the William and Sheila Kona Foundation that will be used for future projects. Here is a picture from the actual quarry in China of the stone as it was cut. It is a little difficult to understand the picture because of everything else that's going on in the background, but there are 3 pieces to the stone. There is the plinth or the base that the stone sits on. Then there are 2 halves, this being half one, the front half, whoops, come back here. The front half of the stone, which has half of a Jewish star, which is a little easier to see from the side view here. And then the back half, which has the other half of the Jewish star with a cleavage going down the middle.
So when you walk around it, it creates a whole.
Right. As you see it from the front, it's a whole star. As you see it from the back, it's a whole star. But as you walk around, it's more mysterious and it's more difficult to understand what it is you're looking at, drawing you in and bringing you up to the front of the monument. Okay, I said there were 3 parts here. The monument itself was part 1. And although we will be installing, we hope, the monument by the end of October, it is now in Lansing, Michigan, and is going to be engraved by Bill Yeager in Lansing because they have a particular hoist that will allow it to be lifted up and he can work at eye level to do the engraving. But we're not going to dedicate it until the spring of 2023 because, as we all know who live here in Rochester, by the end of October, weather is extremely iffy and having an outdoor ceremony would not be a good idea. There are 2 curved benches, which are pictured below here, that will be inscribed, each with a quotation, one from Elie Wiesel and one from Abraham Joshua Heschel. and they will be installed on either side of the monument. They are here and are already engraved. And then also in the spring of 2023, when the frozen ground is thawed, we will be putting in appropriate plantings to create a meditative garden. What we'd like to do now, whoop, come back, it went too fast. What we'd like to do now is go back to our map and take you on a walk, a virtual walk through the cemetery to hear the stories of the families. The first story we're going to tell you about is that of the Bornstein Samuel family. No one seemed to know the story of the Bornstein Gravestone, which is found right here at this X in section 10 of the Temple Sinai plot at Mount Hope Cemetery. I was particularly intrigued. Marjorie was also, and she will tell you about that, but I was particularly intrigued by the fact that it was the first Holocaust grave that I noticed in walking through these sections that stood out in my mind, because 4 people have gravestones in this one stone, but only one person is buried there, meaning it's both a gravestone and a cenotaph. I was intrigued that only one person was buried, but that there were 4 stories I needed to learn. I did a lot of research. I found a book on Amazon that was by one of the sons involved here, The Bornstein Identity by Walter Bornstein. And I wasn't able to get it because, of course, it was out of print. Dennis Carr, who's the vice president of our board, works in the U of R library system, and he was able to find the book for me from the University of Vermont, of all places, on interlibrary loan. I got the book, read the book thoroughly, and just dived right into the research. And now I would like to tell you the story of the Bornsteins, but it's not going to be just the Bornsteins. It's going to be the Bornsteins and the Samuels. So I now have to teach you another new word. In addition to cenotaph, I want you to all go home knowing what the term machatonim means. It's a Yiddish word, and it refers to 2 families that are related by marriage. So my in-laws and my parents are not blood relatives of each other, but there's certainly a relationship there. And that's what the machatonim are, the in-law parents, if you will. So the story is not just of the Bornsteins and the Bornstein grave / cenotaph, but it's also going to be the story of the Samuel family, because the Samuels and the Bornsteins are machatonim. Let's start with the Bornsteins. Here's the front of the Bornstein grave. And this immediately caught my eye. Mother Regina Ursula, Father Bernhard martyred. Well, obviously these are not his birth and death dates. Rather, he was born in 1891 in Kielce, Poland, but he died in the Warsaw Ghetto. Regina, on the other hand, was born in Cologne, Germany, and she died here in Rochester. I needed to learn this story. So let's go back to 1914. In 1914, during World War I, Germany invaded the Russian Empire, which at that time included Poland. Bernhard was born in Kielce, Poland, and was one of the many Polish men, along with his father, that Germany deported from Poland into Germany to work as laborers in the Humboldt factory in Cologne. It was there that he met Ursula, and although her gravestone reads Regina Ursula, she's known as Ursula by her children. Sorry about that. He met Ursula Glucksmann, a Cologne native who was born in 1895, who was working in her father's bakery. When World War I ended in 1918, Ursula and Bernhard married, and they had 4 children. Anna was born in 1920, Ella was born in 22, Walter was born in 24, and then baby Hirsch came along in 1933. When he was born, he was known as Harry, and he took on the name Hirsch sometime during the war. In October of 1938, as World War II began, the Nazis deported Bernhard and his father from Cologne back to Poland, along with many other Polish citizens. Bernhard was originally sent to Lutz, and his family received one postcard from there, but never heard from him again. From the records, it is believed that he died in the Warsaw Ghetto sometime between 1940 and 45. Here's where the story starts to become tragic. Ursula was left with 4 children, ranging in age from 5 to 18. As things worsened for the Jews under Nazi control in Cologne, Ursula tried to escape Germany with her family. Walter was 14 at this time. He fled on his own to Poland. As a male who was blonde-haired and blue and green-eyed, he felt he would stand a chance. Ursula and the 3 remaining children fled to Brussels with some of her family. Walter joined the family in Brussels at the beginning of May 1940, and the family thought they were safe. 1 week later, Germany invaded Belgium, and the family was once again under Nazi control. Walter was taken by the Germans to work as a slave laborer along the coast of France, building the Atlantic Wall, a fortress meant to prevent an invasion by the Allies. While moving from one labor camp to another, he was able to escape and make his way back to Brussels to look for his mother and siblings. But when he got there, they were nowhere to be found. Walter joined the resistance, managed to survive the war, and ultimately emigrated to New York City. He worked his way from there to Rochester, New York, and did not find out what happened to his mother and siblings until 1949. Let's go back to the rest of the family. Shortly after Walter left Brussels, the Nazis came to the apartment where Ursula was living with the 3 remaining children and ordered Anna and Ella, who were in their late teens, early 20s, to leave immediately for an assembly camp in Mourning, halfway between Brussels and Antwerp in Belgium. They were told they were being rounded up to work, but that was a mere pretext. This was the last Ursula heard of her daughters. In doing research, I found that in the memorial book of the Bundesarchiv, the National Archive of Germany, both Anna and Ella Bornstein were deported from Mourning to Auschwitz concentration camp on August 4th, 1942, and died in the gas chambers about 1 month later in September of 42. Let me go to the girls' side. Here is the girls' side of what is a cenotaph for them. And although these dates were unclear at the time this was put up, we have been able to actually determine that it was 1942 that they were killed. The pictures that I have here are taken from their transit cards when they were sent to the Mourning transit station. When the girls were taken, Ursula brought Harry, who was 8 to 9 years old at the time, to a Catholic orphanage and found a Gentile family that was willing to take her on as a servant. Harry feared the other boys in the orphanage would discover he was circumcised, so after a short time, he ran away. He was also a fair-haired child with green eyes, and he was able, even as young as he was, to hide in farms and fields, grab some work where he could from farmers, and pass himself off as a young Catholic boy. Somehow, he survived to the end of the war and worked his way back to Brussels and found his mother about a year after the war ended through the Red Cross. Ursula and Harry continued living in Brussels after the war. Harry could barely read or write, as he had not attended school at all between from the start of the war to 1945. But between 45 and 1949, he learned French, Hebrew, English, and took classes in math, science, and social studies to catch up. In 1949, the Red Cross notified Walter that his mother and brother were alive and living in Brussels. He was able to bring them both to Rochester and assist them in starting a new life. Walter married his wife, Rivka, also a Holocaust survivor. So again, we're going to have Machatanim. And they had 2 sons, Jonathan and Daniel. After moving from Rochester in 1965, working in various cities, the family settled in California. And Walter's personal story is captured in the book, The Bornstein Identity, which I showed you before. And it was the basis of our understanding the Bornstein grave marker. Harry, meanwhile, in Rochester, had changed his name to Hirsch, attended Franklin High School, earned a Regent's diploma in 2 years, then attended the U of R, where he earned a degree in electrical engineering. He married Lydia Samuel. Aha, the Machatonim come in again. The daughter of Holocaust survivors, Eric and Thekla Samuel. Let me come down here. Eric and Thekla Samuel. In this story, as well as many others, Holocaust survivor families marry each other. Now let's explore the Samuels, the Bornsteins Machatonim. The Samuels story is one of long journeys to escape Nazi brutality. Eric Rudolph Samuel, born in 1906, was living in Cologne when the war broke out. As the increasingly harsh laws were enacted against the Jews, he chose to flee to the Belgian Congo. He wrote to his good friend, Thekla Bamberger, who was born in 1916, that she needed to get out of Germany. She needed to join him in Africa, and thankfully she listened. Thekla left Cologne, went to the Belgian Congo, and there they married. They had 3 daughters while living in Africa, Lydia, Ellen, and Jeanette. The Samuel family left Africa via Pan Am Flight 151 from Leopoldville on May 24, 1947, and came to New York City, eventually also working their way to Rochester. Here their daughter Lydia met and married Hirsch Bornstein, and they in turn have three daughters, Ellen, Jenny, and Lisa. And it is Lydia Bornstein-Ruckelson who was so kind and allowed us to interview her and filled in many of the blanks in our research. Hirsch married his second wife, Carolyn Singer, who we also would like to thank for contributing much original material to us, materials from Hirsch's own diaries, and she also helped to make this story come to life. Ursula died in Rochester on July 29, 1970. Her gravestone, which includes the cenotaphs for her husband Bernhard and her 2 daughters, Anna and Ella, was designed by her son, Hirsch Bornstein. The Friends of Mount Hope would like to give special thanks to the following Bornstein members who gave so generously of their time in allowing us to interview them. Lydia Bornstein-Ruckelson, the daughter of Hirsch Bornstein and Lydia Samuel, Carolyn Bornstein, wife of Hirsch Bornstein, and Dan Bornstein, son of Walter Bornstein. And now I'm just going to give you an overview of their genealogy, because I know I've given you a lot of names. Here we have Ursula and Bernhard, who had Harry, Walter, Ella, and Anna. Ella and Anna died in Auschwitz. Walter survived on his own, and Harry survived on his own. Harry married Lydia Samuel, and together these people had 3 daughters. Walter married Rivka, and they had 2 sons. Now I'm going to add in the Samuel family. Here are our Machatonim up here. So we have the Bornsteins and Eric and Thekla Samuel. They had 3 daughters, of whom Lydia was one. And again, the 3 children, the grandchildren of everybody here, Ellen, Jenny, and Lisa, and then the cousins over here, Daniel and Jonathan Bornstein. Now let's turn to our second location up here in section 7 as Marjorie takes over.
Okay, I got a message on my super duper science fiction Apple Watch that it's hard to see me. So I may just move over a little.
Here, come in.
And thank you very much to the good friend who alerted me. Technology is great. I think maybe we should have called this program Machatonim in Mount Hope Cemetery.
Exactly.
That's right.
I agree.
Right. And I will just add that the kind of random way that we even became connected with the Bornstein family was because at around 5 in the morning, one morning, we had to show up at Mount Hope Cemetery for a TV interview. And one of the Bornstein family members saw us. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, one of Lisa's sisters.
And contacted Lisa, and Lisa contacted us. So You never know what will come out of being at Mount Hope Cemetery at 5 in the morning.
Absolutely.
Right, it's a lot of fun. So sometimes things are hidden in plain sight. Often things are hidden in plain sight. For many years, like many of you, I would drive down Mount Hope Avenue and stop at the traffic light at Elmwood. Waiting for the light to change, I would look over at the cemetery, and like Marcia, I was haunted and chilled by the Bornstein stone that Marcia has just talked about, wondering about the fate of the two sisters who were described as martyred. And now that stone story has renewed life. Just want to be sure. Can people see me? If you can't see me, send me a message. Also hidden in plain sight was the story of a family at Temple Brith Kodesh, whom I knew through social action projects. Knowing that they had a strong concern for human rights, I put two and two together, and I realized that my friend Josh Hertz, who contributes so much to the well-being of Afghan refugee families and whose father Arthur was active in defending and furthering human rights of many others, comes from a family of survivors whose stories I'm about to tell you. So on one side of his family are the Blums, and you can see Fritz Blum and his wife Lise Blum, those are their nicknames, Frederick and Elizabeth, in the photograph on the left, and their stone on the right. A group of our survivors lived in Germany. In some cases, their families had lived there for centuries. Before the war, Germany was a country of 68 million people, roughly. The total Jewish population of Europe was about 9.5 million people. Jews represented a sliver, 1% of the German population. They had no reason to believe, as they pursued careers and educated their children in the 1930s, that they would be forced to leave a country they had fought for, that they loved, on pain of death. A tiny subset of this number were the Hertz and Blum families, who were both representative of contributing, well-educated professional families. They landed at different times in Rochester, where two of their children united the families in marriage and began a family of their own. We'll start with the story of the Blums. As through Frederick or Fritz, we can have a sense of his awareness that the fate of the Jews in Germany was shifting, as he went from holding fast to a belief that as long as the country's laws remained intact and observed, the Jews would be relatively safe. And then as time went on, he was led to the recognition that with the Nazis in power, the laws were fast becoming meaningless. He left a memoir in which he documented this history. He and his wife lived in Nuremberg with their children, two daughters, originally three, one had tragically died of leukemia, I believe, and one son. Nuremberg had a small Jewish community, only 9,000 Jews, who felt deeply rooted and protected by German laws. In January 1933, Fritz, a lawyer, who was convinced of the incorruptibility, these are his words, the incorruptibility of judges and of their determination to prevent any excesses of the Hitler mob, end quote. The first change he witnessed was that Jewish-owned businesses were required to find a Nazi representative to make decisions about their company. On April 1st, 1933, a boycott of Jewish companies was instituted. Soon after, Jewish lawyers and judges were denied entry to the Hall of Justice. This was amended to permit Jews who had fought at the front in World War I to be admitted, as well as those who had been lawyers prior to World War I. This gave Blum renewed access to the courts. Until 1935, he advised his clients to wait it out because he believed that Hitler would disappear and things would return to normal. In 1935, when Goebbels enacted laws, the Nuremberg laws, that dismissed all Jewish officials, forbade Jews from employing female household help under 45, forbade sexual relationships between Jews and Christians, among many other onerous restrictions, he accepted that the laws were constricting freedoms and indeed threatening the well-being of him, his family, and his clients. In 1937, identity cards were no longer issued to Jews of Nuremberg, which made the ordinary means of making a living and obtaining food rations Impossible. Jews were having to sell their businesses at severely discounted prices. Blum recounts tragic stories of loss and suicide among individuals from whom their livelihood had been taken, who saw no viable path for their safety. He continued to try to represent clients as best he could, with extraordinary courage on his part in his negotiation with German and Nazi officials. Until 1938, Blum helped his clients sell their businesses and straighten out their affairs, as many made plans to emigrate. At one point, he realized that his only choice was to leave, but that was not before the first pogrom in Nuremberg in November 1938, Kristallnacht, when, in his words, residences were ruined, cars were taken, and a number of Jews were murdered. His daughter, then a teenager, reminisced that when she called the police for help as their home was being invaded, they asked if she was Jewish. And when she affirmed that she was, the police said they couldn't help her. After Blum bravely appeared in police headquarters representing clients who had been taken away, he himself was later badly beaten at his home and taken back to police headquarters for several weeks. With the help of some Nazis who remained loyal to him and some friends, as well as his intrepid wife, Lise, he and his family were able to arrange to emigrate in December 1938, and they came to the United States, where he was employed by a client in Lawrence, Massachusetts, who had established a branch of his German company. As he recounts, however, many of his friends were gassed or shot in camps. His two daughters found their way to Rochester. Some of you may have known one or both of them. Ursula Blum, Granite, and Hildegard Blum, Hertz, were his daughters. Both became active in the fields of social work and disability rights. Hildegard, thinking that she was headed for a job in New Rochelle, which she knew was close to New York City, actually found herself in Rochester, New York, surprised to learn that she was closer to the bright lights of Canada than New York. In Rochester, however, she met and married Arthur Hertz, who had found his way here from Berlin. His family's story is one of anguish, resilience, luck, and ultimately the recognition that there is suffering all around us and we must work to heal the world. And this is maybe one of the most beautiful stones in the cemetery because of its beautiful, beautiful inscription. Strong as death is love. This is Gabriella, who is known to her family as Yella, and Emil Hertz. Arthur's parents, Gabriella and Emil Hertz, believed that their settled and carefully curated lives would continue until their deaths of old age in Berlin, where they lived in a lovely home with their 4 children, surrounded by art and music. However, life had a different story in store for them. Emil Hertz had received his PhD in history, and as he was mindful that as a Jew in Germany, even in the early 20th century, he would not be successful finding a university position, he took a job with one of Germany's most important publishing companies. There he found great success through the early 1930s and 40s, publishing the book All Quiet on the Western Front. Like many of the clients represented by Fritz Blum in Nuremberg, the Jewish-owned company for which Emil Hertz worked was taken over by Aryan Germans, and he was soon out of a job. With failing vision and marked as a Jew, there was nothing that he could do to support his family. And his wife, Yella, traveled to Italy to see if there might be a better business opportunity for them. When she returned, the laws had been changed. Just like that. And any Jew who left Germany and came back was subject to arrest. Yella was arrested, ironically, after leaving a country that had deprived her and her family of their livelihood in order to seek a safer life and more assured livelihood. Returning to gather that family up, she was sent an order to appear at the Berlin police headquarters with her passport. She was ultimately sent to the women's work camp at Mourning, Germany, where she worked from sunup to sundown in arduous and harsh conditions, ministering to many of her campmates, both physically and spiritually, to the point that they referred to her as Mutter or Mother Hertz. We can go to the next slide. Yella wrote with great sensitivity and insight about her incarceration. And here's her book. I have it right here. You can order it. I think you can get it on Amazon. It is probably one of the most amazing memoirs of its kind that you'll be able to read. And particularly because we don't have, I don't think that many women's memoirs. Here are some examples from her book. She wrote, with not the faintest ray of hope, with no motivation from within, with no faith in a brighter future, you trudge along, exhausted and resigned. Everything makes you sick. The overcrowding and the wretchedness of your surroundings, the monotony of the food. You find the stupid, hostile matrons disgusting. Often you even find your friends disgusting. You know them too well, their mannerisms, their whole attitude. Mostly you find yourself disgusting. You don't want to look at yourself any longer, always in the same dress that you have to wear constantly, day in, day out. You don't want to think the same thoughts any longer. They keep slamming, dazed and confused, into the same brick walls. The whole pointlessness and meaninglessness of the camp is disgusting. When will this misery finally end? Will we be buried alive in here forever? I'm describing her craving for a moment of privacy. Throughout the entire day, there's not a single minute during which you can be alone with yourself. In the day room, during the exercise period, in the sleeping quarters, you are always together with your comrades in misfortune. But the desire for occasional solitude is overwhelming from time to time, even if only for a little while. You would like to be able to lose yourself in thought, undisturbed by the others, by their sight, by their talking, by their movements, forever crowded into this compulsory community. How can you summon the inner peace and composure necessary to think about a difficult letter, to draft a petition? There's only one room for all of that, the lavatory. It is visited relatively infrequently in the afternoon hours. To be sure, in addition to the odor, the cold is also a nuisance, since the windows are kept open for ventilation, even when there is frost on the ground. But you can easily put up with that, and because every woman understands how absolutely necessary a little solitude is, everyone is respectful whenever others, driven by the same desire, visit this place. I'm reminded of Virginia Woolf's A Room of Her Own. That was Yella's Room of Her Own. After 6 months, she was released, reunited with her family, and by 1937, they expedited their plans to leave the country, impoverished, homeless, and with no guarantees about what the future held for them. At that time, the US was admitting a shamefully small number of refugees escaping Europe, particularly Jewish refugees. Be sure to tune in to the upcoming Ken Burns series for more on that. But Cuba was much more lenient. Although we know tragic stories like the St. Louis, when Jews were turned back from Havana to be sent to death camps. The Hertz family procured tickets to Cuba after wandering in the south of Europe looking for safe harbor. They left Europe behind, with their only certainty being that they were alive. Cuba was a way station for several years as they awaited visas to the US. Like his future wife, Hildegard, young Arthur Hertz, with the self-confidence of youth, sent a letter out to the universe addressed Kodak, USA, explaining his interest in pursuing photography as a career. The response of a total stranger here in Rochester became the family's path to what would become their forever home here. That someone at Kodak, USA, wrote back and suggested that Arthur apply to RIT, then Mechanics Institute, to study and then pursue a job at Kodak was nothing short, in my mind, of miraculous and divine. He followed that advice and came to Rochester on a student visa, and his family was then able to follow. Next. Somewhere in the audience today, I believe that there are some of the Blum, Hertz descendants. Again, more Makatana. Between the two sides, there were 23 grandchildren. And
Let me go to I'm gonna put the Makatanum up there.
okay,
There we go. The Hertzes and the Blums together.
okay, could you point out Josh?
Josh, who gave
Josh,
us
my
so
good
much.
friend Josh, who was really responsible for doing so much. Arthur, his father, an incredibly active member of the Social Action Committee at Temple B'rith Kodesh, and Hildegard, his wife, who did so much work on behalf of people with disabilities, and many other advocacy projects that continue to this day. Once in Rochester, Emil devoted himself to memoir writing, and Jelle, who had been chauffeured through the streets of Berlin with a car and driver, all the while protesting that it was too showy because she was a very modest human being. She took the bus each morning from Park Avenue in Rochester to Strong Hospital, where she had found a job as a housekeeper. As she did at the Mourning work camp, she mentored those around her, helped them find solutions to their problems, and when she died, they contributed funds for the Strong Hospital Library in tribute to her love of books. After her death, Emil visited her at her grave in Mount Hope Cemetery regularly, writing, for example, "You had a good, merciful fate. You rest in peace now, Jelle. O death, where is thy sting? Soon a humble monument will rise above your grave, which our son has now surrounded with flowers. Strong as death is love," the inscription will read from the Song of Songs. About Jelle's own story, he wrote, "What is it, I have often asked myself, that gave you such access to people and bound them again so strong to you? To understand you better, one has to refer to your experiences in the concentration camp in Mourning. You were suddenly pulled down from the height and put in a position of deep humiliation. But you overcame your own suffering through your pity for others, through your spirit of charity, and so you converted the most difficult challenge into a character-building experience. The dungeon is the key to understanding your nature."
Beautiful, beautiful story. What we want to do now is take ourselves back to the cemetery and talk about these stories. We said that this is really about stories and that the stories of memory. Because a Bornstein granddaughter contacted the Friends of Mount Hope after seeing the TV spot on Good Day Rochester, we learned about the Bornsteins. She led us to the Bornstein grandchildren in California. That's Lisa, who we thank again. She also led us to the Samuel family, her maternal grandparents. Marjorie knows everybody. Marjorie says, I know everybody, but I think Marjorie knows everybody.
I think there are people out there laughing.
And she knew people who knew people who knew people. And so we learned about the Hertzes and the Blums. But there are more stories, and we'd like to mention just a few. The Konar story, thanks to Howard Konar, and thanks to William Konar and Sheila Konar, who started the William and Sheila Konar Trust, we were able to get a grant, but it is through their son Howard, and we'd like to thank him, although we'll thank him more formally. In doing our fundraising, we received an online contribution from the Rayburn family in memory of their parents, who were Holocaust survivors. Well, that piqued our interest, and we looked up to see that of course, their parents were both buried at Mount Hope, but we only had a story for their father. We didn't have a story for the mother. And so the Rayburn family allowed me to interview them and write the story of Annalise Rayburn. And then there's Lothar Weiss, whose daughter Eileen Benz works at MCC, who knew Michael Biester, who ran the Holocaust Project at MCC, and through him, we were able to learn that story. One other person is Sam Rind, who told his mother's story and his story so beautifully on Holocaust Remembrance Day at MCC. We also could not have done this without Nancy Uffendell on our committee, who would find the genealogical information for anyone and everyone, and Christine, who kept the archive up to date, and Tony, who took the pictures of the grave markers, even when none of us could find them. So I just want to show you where all of these people are buried. If you look at the red dot, we're going to start down here with the Bornstein family, who's in red up here. And as we go along, we will add the families. Here's their Machatonim, the Samuel family. Up here in the section 7, we have the Hertz family, and their Machatonim are over here, the Blum family. The Konar brothers, are buried down here in section 10. The Rayburns are back up in section 7. Lothar Weiss is back in section 10, and Clara Rind, Sam Rind's mother, is buried in section 10.
And many others.
And many others. I wanted to show you that picture of the map because it's just a sample of what we want to do. These are our future plans, a lot of which will be done through the educational grant that we received from the Konar Foundation. First, we want to create a digitized map of where every Holocaust survivor grave is in Mount Hope Cemetery and be able to place a code near the monument, which will allow visitors to scan it and be able to find any survivor's grave. We're going to create at least one self-guided cell phone walking tour, which will explain the Holocaust monument, visit some graves, and tell the stories of the people. We are working with the Jewish Community Federation Chi Project, the JCC Holocaust Recordings, the MCC Holocaust Genocide and Human Rights Project, all of which have archival information to ensure that there is linkages between all these Rochester-based Holocaust archives. Instead of having a few here, a few there, we want everything to be connected. Again, not reinventing the wheel, not redoing work that people have already done, just connecting the work together. And then to ensure that the Holocaust Monument remains a focal point for education, we will be using the Konar Foundation grant. So our thank yous go out first to the generous Rochester community. 130 individuals, families, and donor-advised funds contributed to our campaign, as well as the Ames Amzalak Charitable Trust Fund and the Zachor Fund of the Foundation of the Jewish Community Federation. We have to thank the Friends of Mount Hope Board for their unanimous and generous support of this project. For the most part, no one on the board is Jewish except for two people.
No,
And
Monica.
well, two people.
Oh, right.
I'm not on the board.
Right.
So you and Monica are the two people. Yes.
Right.
We can count. One,
Right.
two.
You can count.
I can count. We'd also like to thank Howard Konar and the William and Sheila Konar Foundation grant, and the City of Rochester and City Council member Mitch Gruber, who was able to connect us with Howard Konar and get us started with grant money. And we're ending with this slide. There actually is one more slide after this, but we thought we would read to you the inscription that's going to be on the monument. We honor the memory of the many Rochesterians interred in Mount Hope Cemetery who endured the horrors of the Holocaust in Europe during World War II. May their stories inspire us to create a more caring community. And finally, I'm going to leave this slide up while Brandon starts the question and answer portion, but I wanted you to be able to have input and linkages. You have my email and Marjorie's email up there, as well as a direct link into our Holocaust Archive, the Chai Holocaust Archive, the MCC Holocaust Archive, and a link to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, which has been of immense help in doing the research that we've done. So thank you, one and all.
And thank you, Marcia and Marjorie, for this wonderful talk, very moving talk. Thank you so much for presenting today. Before we move on to the question and answers, I just want to let everyone know that we will continue this series next month on October 8th at 10:30 a.m. with Dennis Carr presenting on architecture and architects in Mount Hope Cemetery. With that bit of housekeeping out of the way, what questions do we have? Feel free to put them in the chat. I'll read them into the record, or join us on camera and have a discussion with Marcia and Marjorie.
We got to get you in. There you are. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this. Do you think this has been up long enough?
I think so.
All right.
Do we have any
That allows
questions?
us to see people.
Do we need to use chat or can we talk?
Oh, you're welcome to talk. You're welcome to talk.
This is Cynthia Hauk.
Hi, Cynthia.
For many reasons, this was extremely interesting. And as a sidebar, I'm seeing my wonderful School 52 and East High classmate Debbie Granite on this program. She and I grew up 3 streets apart, and I never knew her mother's family story. This is the Blum family from Nuremberg. So I'd like to say hello to Debbie. And I'd like to recommend a book called The Pity of It All by Amos Elon, E-L-O-N. That the subtitle is The German Jewish Epic from Moses Mendelssohn in the 1740s, 1933. I acquired the book when I was at the Neue Gallery in New York City. I knew nothing about the book. I've read it now 3 times. It is one of the most compelling and spectacularly interesting, in many ways terrifying stories that I kept thinking, why didn't we learn any of this in world history when we were taking it in high school? So if any of you have not read this book, it is especially when you were talking about the Blums feeling so secure, having been a World War I veteran, and that the laws in Germany would protect them. This book will give you an in-depth and riveting background about that entire situation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have written it down and will attempt to get it.
We have a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
The first one is from Liza. Have you given any thought to expanding this to smaller towns with survivors in New York State?
I think first we have to work with Rochester, and we have been in conversation with, and will continue to be in conversation with, Britain Road Cemetery about helping them to create an archive online similar to the archive that we have. It's not hard to create such an archive. But you do need to have somebody who has technical skills, like our wonderful Christine, who manages to get everything up for us onto the website. All we have to do is write.
Right.
She does the tech part.
I think, Lisa, I mean, I think I understand why you're asking this question. I think you have a family that also has a story, more than one story probably,
Yes.
and who is not in Rochester. And if there's any way that we can be helpful in encouraging this to happen where your family is, we'd be happy to do that.
And I also wanted to tell both Carolyn Bornstein and Lisa that I have rewritten the story I read today is a more comprehensive story of the Bornstein Samuel family, but I have another version of it, which is just a little bit more fleshed out. And I'm going to be sending that to Christine to put up on the website in place of the story that I had written there originally. And I will include a picture of your father Harry's gravestone in Pittsford Cemetery. Although he's not buried at Mount Hope, he designed the stone that is at Mount Hope. And in fact, his stone in the Pittsford Cemetery looks exactly the same.
I also, as I'm scanning the audience, I see Ruth Gonzalez, who is a descendant of the Hertz and Blum family. Do I have that right? She's a descendant of the Hertzes. I'm having a hard time holding this genealogy in my head. Maybe Ruth can remind me. In any event, Ruth was extremely helpful in sharing memories with me. I mean, I also have written at greater length about the Hertz story. At that point, I don't think I was as aware of the Blum story, but I'd be very, in some way, and I know one of my friends has said, you need to make these stories better known. Of course, our website is helping to make them better known, but there is a lot more detail. There's a lot more information, and we will keep working on how to do that. Maybe a book.
Maybe a book.
Do people write books anymore? Anyway, but I wanted to shout out to all the people who helped us. So Ruth, I'm really glad to see you there. And I know I see somebody whose last name is Granite on here. And your mother's story is quite wonderful. And that is also on our website.
So, yes. We decided we were just running out of time, and
You've been here all day
right,
with us.
we could have told you stories all day.
And there's Josh. I see Josh and Ruth, of course.
We can't thank the families enough. Without the families, none of this would be told. And your generosity of time and detail is greatly appreciated.
We probably should thank our husbands too,
I think
because
so.
they have lived and breathed this for several years now and will continue to do so. But their support has been extremely important to us. You know, it's interesting, you tell people that this is what you're working on and they're like, well, yeah, the Holocaust. Well, we know about the Holocaust. Well, actually, yeah, we know a little bit about it, but there's just so much more to learn. And I think maybe, you know, I don't want to monopolize the conversation here, but I think one of the things that really struck me the most was the idea that Fritz, as Cynthia said, that Fritz really believed that everything was okay because, after all, the law was the law. Until it wasn't.
So other questions, feel free to just, chime right in here, unmute yourself and chime in.
We have several questions still in the chat as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
No, that's all right. The next one's from Barbara Gibson. Would you please speak about the symbolism of the split in the Holocaust Memorial star?
The split was very important to me. I looked at many, many monuments, both for the Holocaust and for other things. And I spent a great deal of time talking to Marjorie, talking to the committee, and talking to Xavier, our artist. I wanted something to represent the split that occurred for the Jewish people, the cleaving of the Jewish people by the Holocaust, the numbers that we've lost. We have certainly not recovered from that.
And the split of families.
And the split of countries and the split of the world. Much like the split of our own country right now. I mean, there's so many ways that we become split apart. And so that was the reason for having the star in two pieces.
And then when we take action and we walk around, it becomes whole. So I also would like to thank Rabbi Stein from Temple Beth
Yes.
because he made it possible for us to identify a place in the cemetery where we could put this monument.
And although Jeff Simmons is no longer the person in charge of the cemetery, the city representative who's in charge of the cemetery, he has a title. I don't know what it is, but it's a wonderful title. I did see him at the Douglas ceremony last week. But Jeff Simmons also worked with Rabbi Stein, and the two of them together found the spot, just determined how far it had to be from the road, did all of the work that was something that we needed to have done, but we didn't know how to go about doing it. And so they just worked together beautifully.
And thanks to Brandon too, who helped
Yes.
make this possible. Is there another question? That was a great question, Barbara. An important question.
We have a couple more questions still. This is from Judy Loeb. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I look forward to viewing the beautiful monument. My question, did you use the archives of the Holocaust Museum in DC?
Online, the online archives I have done quite a bit of research there. The more I do, the more I realize I have to go there, that I have to physically be present. Online, you get a small portion of what is available, and it gives you little tastes of information that if you were physically there, you would be able to delve deeper. And so I've been doing a lot of reading about the Holocaust Museum, and I want to go study there.
Okay.
I don't think my husband's going to let me, but
How did you find the pictures of the Bornstein? That to me was just like a moment. That was a
I
moment.
know that was through the Holocaust Museum.
I mean-
They didn't physically have them, but they directed me to this Bundesarchive, the German state archive. The Germans documented everything.
In fact, when you go in and you look at some of these identity cards, which, you know, have been saved and archived, and you understand more of what you're seeing, and you see that where it says, you know, state, meaning, you know, what was the nationality of these people? None. They had no state. They had been unstated. And also the middle names were changed. You know, every Jewish woman was given the middle name Sarah. Every Jewish man was given the middle name David. Was it David? I think David.
I don't know.
But in any event, I mean, you know, everything that they could do to take away their identity was done. So.
Hi, I had a question to ask. This is Toby Olson.
Hi, Toby.
Hi, you guys. This is, there are no words, as you can tell by the comments in the chat. This work is overwhelming and spiritual and sad and inspiring. What keeps you steady and whole through all of this? Sorry for my dog. How do you guys feel? Because
Say hello to your dog.
you know, right now I'm feeling, you know, the overwhelm of it all, and thinking about you who look into the next story and the next person. I'm curious about you guys as the caretakers and the overseers of this incredible project.
When we get overwhelmed, we have this wonderful committee and they yell at us and tell us to take a break. And they do, Christine, they do. I know you're looking surprised, but you know, just as I tell you when you're overwhelmed with all the things that are put onto your plate, that you need to step back. Marjorie also takes a great burden off of me, and I hope I do off of her. I do have to step away from time to time. I do become overwhelmed.
We don't yell. We encourage.
Oh yeah, that's
We
true.
encourage.
I think I have to say that, and I don't know if this helps me be more or less overwhelmed, but I do feel that I have a very keen awareness of the world around me right now on many, many levels. And if I can find a way to help, working, for example, with Josh, and Susan Hellman, I think I saw you, Susan, on helping Afghan refugees, for example, that goes a long way toward making me feel, and I know Marcia has her own things that she
Yes.
does to feel like we're making things better. I mean, I think the Jewish expression tikkun olam, it's really the only thing that we can do to give ourselves nourishment. Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah.
I will keep your supportive thoughts in my heart.
I have one other thought about that. And I think that sometimes what I can do is change my focus. Instead of focusing on the stories when I become overwhelmed with the stories, I try to focus on something else, such as working with the city. Mitch Gruber has been wonderful in getting us connected into various parts of the city. And Mount Hope is a city cemetery. And so what we hope to be able to do for the future, and this is where I get hope instead of despair, is work with city kids. We want to bring them into the cemetery, train them as docents, make connections that don't exist right now. So that's where I get hope instead of despair.
Thank you. That's very insightful, inspiring
Thank you.
lessons that you've learned. Thank you, guys.
We have a question here from Susan Kramarski. Sorry.
Hey,
Did you have any
She's a friend of both of us.
wonderful. Did you have any parameters about who was a survivor?
Wow,
That's an
Wonderful
excellent
presentation.
question,
you
Susan.
can answer that one.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we talked about that a lot, and we felt that we borrowed essentially the Holocaust Museum definition, which is the 1933 to 1945, people who were impacted in really nearly just about any way, whether they had to leave their country, whether they were in a camp, whether, they had family members who died. I mean, so that is the sort of those are the parameters. I know that there's some dispute, and some people certainly, to leave Europe and come to the United States and have it be fairly seamless. Well, that was wonderful. But on the other hand, any disruption is a psychic trauma. And I would say, and I've come to really say this more and more often, I feel that we are all, in a sense, survivors of the Holocaust, whether we are Jewish, whether we are not Jewish. The world. This was one of the most psychically traumatizing events in the world, and I don't say that in any way. I mean, Rabbi Katz taught me in a wonderful lecture one day, you cannot quantify pain, right, and suffering. And so there is a good deal of suffering out there. There are many stories. There are many people who have suffered in many ways. And certainly within our own country, people are no stranger to suffering, even if they were born here and lived here. And, we can look at many of the histories in our country and say that. But I do feel that when you look at the amount of literature, the amount of music, the amazing amount of material that has been generated by the experience of the Holocaust, it's clear that this does not necessarily just belong to one group. This was the world's suffering. There was suffering that happened, and it continues. There's trauma that continues to inform political events, all kinds of things that affect all of us. So I think we can't just push it aside and say, well, that wasn't my history. I mean, even as a Jew, did I have direct ancestors who suffered? I don't know. That's the thing that's hard. Part of my family came from Warsaw. I cannot believe that no one stayed behind and didn't come to the United States. We're just connected. That's all I can say. So please, those of you who decided to come to this program, clearly there's something in your heart that is connected to.
Marjorie, you make a very strong point that it does go far beyond the Jewish community, that it affects everyone. As a child, our neighbors that were directly behind our home were the Baum family. And this is when I was like 6, 7, 8, maybe 9, 10 years old. And Mr. Baum, whenever he had a short sleeve shirt on, I noticed that there was a number tattooed on his inner arm.
In the Baum's archive.
I learned that a lot later, but I mean, this is before I had learned anything about the Holocaust, World War II. I started to learn about it, if you remember the Sunday program, The 20th Century with Walter Cronkite on Sunday afternoons. That was my first exposure to what Mr. Baum somewhat told us. But because I always could remember, why does he have a number on his inner arm? And then later, when the Baums moved to Canandaigua, and then in his elder years, he spoke frequently about his experience. And I so wished I would have had a chance to hear one of his presentations, because from very young childhood, I can still see his arm and that number, which seemed so strange. And I'm many, many decades beyond my 5th grade age. But yes, you never know how you have first been exposed to this event on a personal basis. It may not be your family directly, but in this case, it was a neighbor who we kept in touch with for decades, up until Mr. and Mrs. Baum's death, even though they had moved to Florida.
Cynthia, thank you you're reminding me of my first moment seeing in Boston on the MTA, and I was a kid, and I saw a number on flesh on an arm, and I really almost passed out. It had such a visceral I had such a visceral response, and I can still remember that feeling. And why I had such a strong response, I don't know. Would another kid have had the same strong response? I don't know. But it was intense. And I remember being afraid, actually, after that, to look at people's arms for fear that I would see a number. It's like nothing else in human history, I think.
And it continues to impact our country. When you see people marching in Charlottesville with Nazi symbols, do our children, do our grandchildren understand in the same way that we do what that means? Why it's so horrific to see somebody marching with under a Nazi banner? And that's for us the reason for the memorial, is that it will be there long after we've gone, with educational programs and explanations and important information that needs to be known.
And in the same way, I think we can't turn our heads, and not witness any group's history
Absolutely.
of tragedy and suffering and misery. And it can be very, as Toby said, it can be very, you can't take on all the world's suffering.
You can go down the rabbit hole.
Right. But if we can help make people slightly more aware, then we will have done something important.
Back to Brandon. Do we have more questions?
We have several more.
Okay.
Well, a simple one. This is from Ron Newman. Can you name the book that you mentioned again? And Ron, if you're still on here, could you clarify which book you're talking about?
There were two. One is The Bornstein Identity, which is written by Walter Bornstein, which looks like this. That was the book that I used. Then there's,
although Lisa has written to me that it's on Amazon, it's very expensive.
It is back on Amazon.
But very expensive.
I found a
Did you
copy.
find it?
I found a copy that was reasonable.
So I don't know, maybe Josh, you can direct us to some, I know that, I don't know if there's a copy, Michael, in the MCC library. We should investigate that too.
And we have many copies of Sam Rind's book
Right.
about his mother, Clara Rind, and himself. And those are being sold in the Friends of Mount Hope bookstore, or Friends of Mount Hope office. We have many copies. In fact, I have to go get another copy because I gave mine to someone at the last talk we gave.
He just clarified he's looking for the book that Cynthia mentioned.
Oh, Cynthia. It was called The Pity of It All.
And it's by Amos, A-M-O-S, Elon, E-L-O-N. He's written a number of other books. This was a New York Times bestseller. I think it was published about 2003. So it's still very much in print.
Okay.
Sorry, one moment here. Got to get back to the next question in the line. There are many, many thank yous in here, and I don't want to put the time into reading all of them. There are so many here, but one that seemed really should read out loud is from Lydia Bornstein-Ruckelson. I'm sorry if I mispronounced.
I call it Ruckelson, but I don't really know.
I'm so sorry.
It's Ruckelson. Thank you.
Ruckelson.
I'm sorry. Thank you for all your incredible work in preserving this incredible memory and history lessons for our world. We are so very grateful for you in this work, with gratitude from the Bornstein and Samuel families. That's why I wanted to read.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. This was incredible. And I have Carolyn Bornstein here. She's.
Can they hear me?
I can, Caroline. Carolyn, you were so helpful to me. You gave me so much information. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. It was wonderful to meet you. It's just a blessing. Hirsch, bless his memory. He was so supportive and loving and caring and positive. He's an amazing man. But when they read about what Walter had said, Hirsch came here on his own. He wasn't brought here. He came here on the Neptune, a small Greek ship in south of Naples. And in 1950, in August, it took him years to get a visa to come here. And when he was little, he spoke 4 languages. He spoke German, French, Flemish, and Dutch,
Wow.
which was amazing. And he played marbles and got a I'm blanking on what it is. He got a cross so that he could pretend he was a little
Right,
Flemish.
so he could pass, right.
And but anyways, he brought his mother here from Brussels.
Okay,
He set her up in a business on St. Paul Street, and he got a bathroom in there and everything. He got her to get naturalized, and he got naturalized also. And he did amazing things. He worked 3 jobs. He was amazing. And when he went to high school, they told him it would take a lot of years for him to graduate. And he said, I don't want to get Social Security. So, yeah, had a great sense of humor. So anyways, bless his memory. And thanks for all of what you're doing and everything Lisa did and all the people. You're all amazing. It is such a blessing. Such a blessing.
thank you, Carolyn,
And,
thank you.
I see a question on here about from Gail and seconded by Lisa, any righteous Gentile stories in Rochester? We would love to hear some.
Absolutely.
And I mean, there are tangential stories. So for example, Rabbi Bornstein, who's buried in the TBK lot, was instrumental. He was there when the camps opened, and he led the first Seder, or
Yep.
I can't, you know, I
The
mean,
first services
the first
there.
services. So he has memoirs, and we would like to include his story. But if anybody knows, so the term righteous Gentile is those people who assisted Jews, whether they hid them or they helped them escape, or in any way helped to save their lives. There is a way of honoring them at the Yad Vashem in Israel. That's a call that we can send out, and certainly we continue to look for any stories of survivors that we don't know yet, and so we welcome those names, and also absolutely for any righteous Gentiles. Because I am as sort of broad thinking as I typically am, which sometimes makes it hard to attend to details, I know that in the cemetery at Mount Hope, there are many, I mean, you go through and you see all the Russian names, for example, and I think there have got to be stories there about, I mean, as I said, you know, suffering is not limited. And so I am curious about the other stories, you know.
Yes, we are always looking for stories. I was at my quilt club, my Genesee Valley Quilt Club meeting, and sat down at a table for lunch and started talking about the fact that this was going to be presented on Saturday. And somebody said, oh, did you know, and mentioned a name. And I said, I don't know that name. And she said, oh, she used to give talks to my husband's high school history class
In Brighton.
in Brighton. And I looked at, she's not even in our database, that wonderful database that we have of 350 people. Her name isn't even in the database.
Anna Paul, do people know her?
And so, you know, there are always people who've slipped through the cracks, and we have to make sure that we keep finding them. So please write to us, call us,
Meet us for coffee.
meet us for coffee.
And thank you all for being here.
I mean, technically, it's noon and our program is supposed to be over. There are still several questions. If you don't mind staying and answering a few more, I'm
No,
happy to keep
sure.
us going. A couple of the questions are related to the one you just brought up about righteous Gentiles. There's one person asked, let me find the name here, sorry, Lisa again. Sorry, she asked the righteous Gentiles question. Gail Pogel, again, sorry, I mispronounced the last name. Did you find stories of any non-Jewish survivors in Rochester? For example, Sinti, Roma, etc. And related to that, we have a question from Ron Newman. Any stories from Rochester soldiers who liberated camps?
Well, Christine, you've talked about your dad, right?
Right. He was a World War II pilot who dropped packages for the resistance. But he's not he's not buried in Mount Hope. And we're
Right.
trying to focus and keep it in Mount Hope right now.
Yeah.
Sort of our first phase, because
Right.
we're a small group, and actually the research takes a long
A lot
time.
of time.
Right. But these are all really wonderful questions, and we can certainly post them on our Facebook page. We can send them to members. But word of mouth is really the best thing. If you know of people, and you know, we all are very painfully aware that life is
Time is short.
life is winding down for a lot of people who have firsthand accounts. So,
Right.
One thing I can say, Marjorie and Marcia and I were talking about this earlier this week. The Rochester Public Library has taken a number of materials in that were formerly at the Jewish Federation's library that are related to this topic. And amongst those materials is testimony from at least one Rochester soldier who liberated Dachau.
Oh, okay.
I
Okay,
don't have
I'm
the
making
name off the top of
notes.
my head, but we have it here.
great. It is a bigger story, and as Christine rightfully points out, you know, our focus as the Friends of Mount Hope is on the Mount Hope burials, but there will be ways of capturing this. And I know I see Mary Jo Lanphier, who's my partner in Historic Brighton, and that's always something that we are interested in too, is telling the stories of Brighton people. And so this will be a lens that we should look, a filter that we should look through.
Mhm.
So thank you. These are wonderful, wonderful thoughts.
And Christine, know that we've hooked ourselves up with Brandon to continue doing research through him, because he now has much of the archival information that we would have loved to have gotten our hands on.
And I'm seeing Michael Easter and thinking this is a good topic for further discussion with MCC, which has a broader reach than we have.
Absolutely. We love our collaboration with you and the Friends, and we look forward to working with you in the future for sure.
Great. Okay, anything else, Brandon?
There are a couple questions. Cynthia Hauk asked if there are any other cemeteries, such as Whitehaven, that have initiatives to identify / recognize Holocaust survivors there, but you may have answered that already with the recent comments.
No one else is doing something like this at the moment, except that we do want to work with Britain Road to at least, not so much on a monument, but to make an archive for their survivors. But as Marjorie keeps reminding me, we're working from Mount Hope at the moment, and we have to get that done first. Focus.
There is another question, one that brings a bit, sits a little close to my heart as a special collections librarian. And this may actually be more of a question for Christine, I believe, to answer. This is from Gail Ferrioli. Have you considered keeping copies of all your material in a few separate locations that are not connected to the linked storage / websites as a protection against hacking and the deleting of your well-documented sorties, i.e. digital preservation, as we call it in my field?
Well, right. I'm a retired librarian. I know that term. Right now they live not only on our website, but they probably live on Marcia's and Marjorie's computer, my computer, Nancy Uffendel's computer. But we aren't, we're a small organization. And while we have multiple copies, lots of copies, keep things safe, they're sort of spread out. It's not an official, we don't have it in a Google Drive or in the cloud right now.
But we look forward to getting suggestions on how to do that.
Very inexpensive suggestions.
And even as someone working in an institution like this, it is not an easy topic to encapsulate quickly or do
No.
simply.
But I wrote it down as something we need to discuss at some point.
And actually, paper on acid-free paper is still the best
Yes.
method of preservation, believe it or not.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Microfilm is also an excellent option for much the same reason.
I see somebody who's talking about a gentleman who lives in Greece
Yes,
who
Joe.
liberated a concentration camp.
How do we make sure we get a copy of the chat, Brandon?
I should get it, excuse me, I should get it as a download when we're done,
Okay,
and I can forward it to you.
that would be great. That'd be great, just so that we can make sure we've answered people's questions.
And Maureen, if you're able to provide contact information to Marcia and or Marjorie for Mr. Foy, that I'm sure that would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Cynthia Hauk follows up on Whitehaven with
Let me talk to Jack and see what he wants to do.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Sorry, and Cynthia Hauk has a good follow-up comment here regarding Whitehaven. As Whitehaven is technically in the town of Parenton, the town of Parenton historian Bill Porre might be interested in learning more of the FOMH initiative to identify/recognize Holocaust survivors, your methodology, etc., for duplication at Whitehaven.
Okay.
Okay.
That is the last thing I find in the chat. Do we have any final comments or questions from those viewing at home?
Oh, thanks, Judy. I see a hand clapping.
And again, there have been
Thank
many,
you.
many messages of thanks that have come in the chat, and I more than I could possibly read without
Thanks,
taking
Ron.
several more minutes. Thank you so much both for the work you've done and for doing this presentation today. I'm also glad that we just had a chance to discuss the materials that are here at the library now and put them in more
Yes.
context.
Yes.
So again, thank you to everyone who joined us for this presentation from home. Again, we will return on October 8th for our second presentation of the season.
I have some of your papers.
And
You can put them back.
knows, again, the recording that we made of this presentation today will go up on the library's YouTube channel and be available as soon as possible, definitely by early next week.
Great.
So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
you.
for coming.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.